Just because you're paranoid, it doesn't mean they're not out to get you. Vyzygoth's Grassy Knoll continues.
Okay, listen, we have with us in the second hour Andy Colvin. Just a couple of things, if you would. One, someone who's a listener who's helped out the show a bit and whom you folks might know by his handle in the chat room and stuff as Captain. He's Wayne from Houston, and his father died suddenly, like they had no clue, and you can imagine what's going on in that family. If you're giving a prayer, do so. Whatever it is you do, pass it along his way in their hour of sadness. Also, one of our listeners who's in our chat room right now, who I call Farm Tech or PT, lost her mom a while ago. I think most of you folks are aware of it, but, it's just something to keep in mind while people try to repair. Thirdly, with regard to this stuff about myself and Alan Watt and all that jazz, I'm going to put up These Days, Volume 6, that will address that. And not in a bad way, just to clear the air and try to stay away from the stench that I believe is promulgated by the Patriot Networks and their listeners. So understand that that's coming out for whatever that's worth. But be that as it may, we have with us again from Seattle the author of The Mothman's Photographer, and that is Andrew Colvin. Andrew, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
And, you don't have to say too much about this, but it's okay. I think we can mention this before the folks. I told you, as it came close to my last birthday, which was the 22nd of August, whether, if I would outlive my father, and I guess I have by 14 days or so. I mean, he died way too soon. I can't believe I'm older than he is now, or he was now. And, of course, the situation, too. Your dad died very young, I think at the age of 49, and you're kind of looking toward the date of your birthday, which comes in October, with a certain amount, I don't know, what you call it, melancholy maybe, or I don't know. I mean, did you want to just briefly just say how you look at this date coming up?
Well, I will be 1 year older than, or I will, I will click from 48 to 49. He died when he was 48.
Okay.
Technically, I'm already older than he is, but
okay.
I think it's just something that people go through with their parents. I think my brother kind of went through that.
Yeah, I mean,
revisiting of the feelings.
It was just something that came all of a, well, it came all of a sudden when you're what? I guess I was 26 or something like that. And, he was older. He's my dad. But, 57 doesn't register to you until you're 57. You realize, man, this ain't old at all. And here I am, and I'm thinking of my dad and going through the stages, when he was 30s and 40s and where I was, although I had no children to raise. And it seemed cruel. And, and of course, when the day came around for me, it seemed so much more tragic, his early departure, because he really was never sick a day. So, I mean, you've gone through it, and we've shared that, and I think that's okay to say in front of the folks. I appreciate if you give us a little look into, what you're thinking as well, because it's, it's part of life. And here Wayne, loses his dad at an early age as well. So it does happen, but, be it short or long or however much time you have to prepare, it really doesn't help things.
Right. There's the basic sort of loss, and then for me, just with the whole Mothman thing, then it sort of gets into all the other stuff of, was he really killed by these guys that seem to have been involved in all the different assassinations? With Mothman, you have prophecies of all those, assassinations back then, and various pieces of information and evidence that link to that area of West Virginia with all these different assassinations. I mean, not just prophecies. But we talked about them last time. I just listened to 33, the 33rd episode.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was a good one, by the way. That was 2 hours long, and there were some great things in there. And but we did talk about James Earl Ray and some of the strange things. Why was the white Mustang that he drove seen Pleasant? Why the guy with the checkered coat like he wore there, and he could have actually been there. He was actually sort of out and about at that time. But there's things like that with the JFK thing. There's the guy who found the extra bullet, who was killed when he was with a guy, Alvis Maddox, whose name came up in Keel's investigation.
Yeah. And Maddox isn't that an interesting name as we've gone into, huh?
Mm-hmm.
as it relates also to that West Virginia area in which you live. Is that correct?
Yeah. And with RFK, you've got the Manson connection. I mean, I think that's really just so obvious to the story and somehow gets overlooked, is that Tate and Polanski were best buds with Robert F. Kennedy. And they definitely wanted to get rid of him because he was, I guess he's still really held up as the liberal sort of icon.
I want to let you know, too, I don't know if you heard, you may not have, I think you might have, but that break song was picked especially by Big Jim in Illinois for you, for the Garuda song that was. So, did you get a chance to listen? Huh? Well, I don't know if you heard the break song between Barry Chamish's exit and your entry.
Oh, no.
Oh, you didn't hear it?
I didn't.
Okay, well, we recorded it. Take a listen because Jim picked that out especially for you.
Okay.
So, anyway, take a look for that if you would. I don't know if you want to go down this road, but I don't know if you want to go Kennedys or whatever. There is one other question I wanted to ask you about what you suppose or surmise or whatever about your dad's passing. Do you feel that his death was related to what he knew?
Either that or he was just picking up pieces of information, and that got him into trouble. I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but I'm becoming more suspicious or whatever that they were not just working on A-bomb stuff in Mound. And I actually think there's a nuclear reactor on Blaine Island now. I've got a photo, I took cursory photos of it last time I was in town, and there's this thing there that looks just like a nuclear reactor. And it would make sense because that is where they were basically building the various, getting the minerals and the nickel and so forth together for the spinners that were used to make the uranium. And you'd obviously, I think, need to test those, on site. So anyway, I think they were building scalar weapons, potentially this Nazi doomsday weapon that was brought over. No one quite knows where it was taken, but it was flown out of Germany on a Junkers airship. By the way, I don't know, did I mention the airship that was seen by the first UFO sighting by Kenneth Arnold? Was the drawing of it looks just like a German wing, what they call the wing, is an early version of the stealth bomber. That was actually a plane that was in production or secret, it was a secret plane. It was flying around Mount Rainier in 1947. That's what Kenneth Arnold first saw. And then the next day, I guess he saw some little balls of light, and then they called them saucers, and bingo. I don't know how that happened. How do you suddenly have... It's almost like the UFO saucer thing was ready to go. It was like an op that they had ready, the symbology, everything, and then they just deployed it. That's just the feeling you get. I don't know how Kenneth Arnold, but...
I just got an email from Larry, the contractor guy down in Austin, who sent me some stuff. He said, this might be a little bit wacky, but on the other hand, you might want to take a look through stuff and see, what's going on. And I guess I also had remembered watching one of these, History Channel things about the military and Hitler and the V-2 rockets and all that stuff. So I'm trying to put this all together, synthesize this kind of stuff to see if I can come up with a show on it or not. And I don't know if you want to go there or not, but, do you have a take necessarily? And Adam Golightly, I know, is out there in the audience. But do you have any kind of take or any kind of opinion as to how close the Nazis were to anti-gravitational aircraft and such? Do you have any insight into that at all?
Well, it seems like they were pretty darn close and had some things flying around in the test areas, from what I've read.
Mm-hmm. But don't you find it interesting, though, in this day and age, that there's still this very, very, and I would say expanding, but murky universe out there, and excuse the pun, where people know something's going on. I mean, we've all seen things and heard things for at least, since post-World War II era. And we still don't really know what's going on. And that just makes you tend to think that that might even be deliberate to keep us in the dark. But certainly something's going on. And in fact, what happened? Just the other day, in fact, a town in Texas got all riled up because people started calling in about UFOs, and the town called the nearest base. I can't remember which one that was, and said, "Are you guys doing anything?" And they responded, "No, we weren't." And then, however many hours later, they're going, "Oh yeah, we were." So again,
Jacques Vallée was recently interviewed, and he was mentioning that that they use supernatural things all the time as covers for some op that they're doing, like the down satellite, the satellite that fell, which probably was nuclear powered, and then it lands goes over Peru, and everyone gets sick, and they call it mysterious meteor sickness instead of the obvious.
Well, anyway, this is an awful long intro necessarily. We've got about 15 minutes, but what exactly was on your mind as far as talking points that you wanted to cover? And I'm going to tell the folks, really, Andrew and I, for years now, have done like a timeline, and that'll continue, but we thought that it would not be best for this format in case folks wanted to call in and such, because when we get going, we get going. As he said, in 33, we went 2 hours. That's just the way it goes, and it will continue that way. But for this hour format with the possibility of people calling in, we want to do something a little bit different. Andrew, is there anything you wanted to address up top?
Well, not really. I mean, I just have my usual 2 or 3 pages of notes with interesting little deals, things that have happened recently.
All right, so let me throw something out to you because you mentioned the Kennedy assassinations. One, we're going to have on an individual by the name of Joan Mellon, who's going to talk about Jim Garrison, obviously, who's a major figure, mostly after the fact, if not exclusively after the fact, of the Kennedy assassination and the warrant reports. The other thing is that, in fact, Chamish has just come out with a book, the guest that was on before you, called With the Kennedys. One of the things I thought about is that one of the feelings I had is that whoever whacked JFK also wanted to whack RFK, and what was the common point there? What entities wanted both of them gone? I would assume they want, it was the same ones, or then RFK perhaps sinned in so many other ways, which I don't think is the case. So, having said that, we'll have Joan on hopefully shortly. But any thoughts about that as far as the Kennedy assassinations, both of them, not just looking at JFK alone?
Well, I think that, the obvious thing that, as you were saying that I thought of was Manson. Manson went after RFK's friends, and Manson also tried to shoot Ford and help Nelson Rockefeller get into the presidency. So, I mean, in a way, Manson is kind of the, epitome or a really good focus point, because I mean, it's big oil. I mean, most likely. So, or there's the whole Israeli thing about JFK that he was, and this kind of connects back to what I was saying about Mound. The atomic research. This is definitely part of the JFK story with David Ferrie and those guys sort of flying uranium around, but JFK not wanting to support Israel in their secret development of the bomb is one of the more compelling pieces of potential evidence, or reasons why they would go after him. But there's lots of other reasons, too. The oil depletion allowance is another big one. So,
again,
the mob, I don't think, had a real reason. They're not really politically motivated, because he was a Catholic. It doesn't, I think the mob is really a sort of a diversion, mob angle.
I've got some thoughts about that, but before I go any further, Adam is in the chat in the separate chat room. Do you have anything, Andy, on the Mothman being seen in Dealey Plaza?
Was Mothman seen in Dealey Plaza?
No.
I haven't heard that one.
That's what Adam said. He goes, yeah. Adam was talking about Joan Mellon coming on. He said he thinks she's a little off base, but it should be good. That's okay. That's fine.
Well,
and he said Mothman was seen in Dealey Plaza, which if you've not heard, I've not heard either.
Joan Mellon say that, or?
I don't think he's associating with Joan Mellon. In fact, Adam, why don't you call in on 888-333-9009 and let's just talk this out. I mean, we don't have to go through.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Well, I mean,
it would make perfect sense.
if you're cool with listening from whence he got that, I think that would be great, and let that happen. So anyway, Adam, I'm threatening you to call 888-333-9009 and talk about that. And Adam says he will do that, and I don't think you mind that whatsoever. Also, what I'll say, and if we want to get into it, Kennedy also popped off to the Vatican when he was campaigning in 1959 that he would not be controlled by it. He also, of course, had that very interesting speech in April of '62 when he talked about a monolithic conspiracy, and that's very interesting as well. But he, like Lincoln, I mean, everybody talks about all these synchronicities and coincidences, but I think also you found two individuals who probably knew the game plan and were elected to and implement it, and then both of them had an attack of conscience, which was probably not a good idea. Both at probably the same time in their presidencies, about midway through or a little bit toward the second half of their presidencies, both obviously taking office in '61 and obviously in '63, Lincoln with Gettysburg, and Kennedy for whatever reason, and it probably happened before then, but they made a lot of enemies. So many that I don't think either one of them could have gotten out of there alive, and certainly they did not. So there was a lot of factors going on. I still wonder sometimes about exactly what it was, but I'll just say that I've seen some shows where they say that the mob didn't really care about Cuba. They had other fish to fry. They were doing very well. But I still think it's interesting because the mob gave Kennedy the election in '60, and they wanted paybacks, was not restoring Cuba to their gaming part of the payback that did not happen, and were they involved in it? I don't know. So,
yeah.
Any thoughts about that? We can go on and on. I mean, it's speculation.
That could be too. That's fair enough. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Go Riley said I was joking about Mothman and Dealey Plaza. Oh, you stink. Oh. Go Riley,
Well, the way the UFO world works, that will now be probably the longest lasting Mothman story. It'll probably last 200 years that he was at Dealey Plaza. All the other stuff will be forgotten. All the real stuff. And that
Go Riley just created history, huh?
Yeah. That'll be the one. He was at Chernobyl, he was at Dealey Plaza, and he was at 911.
All right. And also, let me ask you, too, while we're taking this supposed break or whatever, I'm just reading something from Jim. We'll let that slide for now. But, Andy, you've got Mothman Photographer 2 out now. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. That's the latest edition thus far.
Mothman 3 is finished and is in the design phase.
All right. What does 3 give us that 2 didn't?
3 gives us 3. I am just more and more excited about this book. It's basically West Coast stuff. So all the witnesses in Mothman 2 were from West Virginia or that area. All the ones in 3 are from the West Coast or the Southwest. And you start to see, a lot of the same sort of things. And then also just the fact that I've been able to have more time to sort of draw threads together from the earlier stuff. I think that some of the notes that are in the new book are really exciting, hit some really interesting points that, we haven't gotten to yet. Like, for instance, I've been reading a lot of Milton Erickson lately, and he's the father of modern hypnosis.
Mm-hmm.
well, what does he say about, and he was operating, back in these times of the UFOs and so forth, and doing a ton of research on people with amnesia, creating amnesia. I mean, he was a good guy. This is a man who healed hundreds, thousands of people. He was the best. He was he was the Michael Jordan of hypnosis. People are still trying to figure out how he did what he did. But, so I get several of his books, and one of the first things I read, I just open the book to a random page, and there it is, the statement that the best way to create amnesia in a hypnotized patient is to put them exactly back where they were and send them on their way just as they had been. And, of course, this is the hallmark of all of your UFO abduction cases.
Well, what does that mean by send them back to where they were? At the moment there was at the supposed trauma, or?
Well, to whatever it was that you used to occupy their conscious mind long enough to put them into a hypnotized state. And this is your flaccid light or your, your UFO, whatever. And I was noticing with the Derenberger case, some things. This is another little thing I can mention is the Silver Bridge book that I've helped to republish is coming out. It's actually been printed. There's a couple of proofs and so forth. That's going to be out really soon on Amazon. So the original Silver Bridge book, which cost hundreds of dollars, and no one's been able to find it for years and years and years. I was looking through that and found some references to the Derenberger. Gray Barker, people like to claim that he took too much license, but, he pretty much tells the story as it was in certain places in the book. In some places he kind of goes off and gets really poetic, but you can tell when he's doing that. When he's telling the basic stuff that happened, it's fairly factual, and I think his description of Derenberger is probably accurate. But Derenberger's encounter with Indrid Cold sounds to me like a hypnotic situation. The way the craft disappeared and appeared, and the way that Cold made him look into his eyes, and Cold was known to carry a medallion around and try to get people into hypnotic states. And there's a ton about Indrid Cold I don't know yet. There's a lot of people out there that know way more than I do about Indrid Cold, and those people, I think we all deserve to know more about this person. This is a real person who was operating in the area and God knows doing what. But anyway, my point is that in the Silver Bridge, I recommend people read it because Barker is an excellent writer. Mm-hmm. I don't think it was a BS. I think when he was BSing, you knew he was BSing. And I don't think he BSes in his books. I think he kind of did socially, but I don't think he really does in his books that much, as much as people want to pretend. I think, there are definite chapters in the Silver Bridge where he is speaking from a really poetic stance, like he's acting as if he's Mothman, and he's sort of talking in Mothman ways. Mm-hmm. And to me, those are even right on in terms of tone and in terms of my experience in the dream state with this phenomenon. I've had strange dreams where I am Mothman or where I'm melding with Mothman, and I can tell you that when I read the Silver Bridge the first time, I felt like that Barker somehow tapped into that. I think he was really an insightful and intelligent and creative person, and he really had an intuition for what it was, for the human dimension of this phenomenon. It's not out there; it's in there.
I'm going to ask one more question. We have Adam on the line. Adam, just hang with us for a second. Wasn't the Silver Bridge collapse? Wasn't that the event that really brought the Mothman phenomena into American lore or whatever, or cognizance? Was it then? I mean, that's as far back as I go with it, and I don't go that far. But it seemed to me that after that event, the Mothman kind of, I wouldn't say burst on the scene because it wasn't obviously covered by mainstream media, but then it started to gain some kind of prominence. Would that be correct at all, Andy?
You know, it's hard for me to know. It wasn't even on my radar. The book wasn't. You know, I had my personal experience, and I knew something strange had happened, but I didn't read the Mothman book until the early '90s. So I don't think it did much. I mean, maybe it did in the Northeast or in New York or wherever people found the book. And I guess it did. You know, I hear from people who have been in this business a long time, and they say, and it's clear to them that they did read it way back when, and that it has informed them, you know, since.
Also in the chat room, Granny said one of the more interesting UFO cases is Stevensville, Texas. I don't know if she's referring to what happened last week or early this week, but that is exactly where the town fathers complained to the Air Force and such that what was up in the sky and what was going on, it was in fact Stevensville, Texas, a couple of days ago. So I don't know, Granny, what you're talking about, whether it's something a long time ago or just recently, but that's where it happened, without a doubt, recently. And now we have the rumor monger on the line, and that would be Adam Gorightly. Hello, Adam.
Hello, gentlemen.
You better grovel, dude.
I thought you would realize that is an obvious joke. Mothman in Dealey Plaza? Come on.
I will say for my own part, Adam, that I trust you implicitly. And now that you've lied to me, I will never again trust you. But having said that, what do you think, Andy?
Well, was Mothman right above the 6th floor window? Is that where it was?
He, casted a shadow, actually over Oswald, or whoever was pointing the weapon out of the 6th floor window.
So he could shoot better.
Yeah.
And Jim was making fun in the chat room saying they're photoshopping that right away, and I'm sure they are. And just let me answer this for whatever it's worth, okay? And I'll throw it to you first, Andy, and then Adam, if you want to weigh in on this. You know, I did not get right away what happened with 9/11/2001, which we're 2 days away, of course, from a 7-year anniversary. But you know, there was a lot of stuff that was put out, and one was a picture of a winged creature. Do you remember that at all, Andy?
From 9/11, yeah.
All right, now, you know, that got whatever leverage it got or whatever yardage it made. Did you have any feelings about that originally?
Me? It looks to me like a piece of debris, but I think what is at work here is that people at some level know that this really is a real phenomenon. I mean, I think at a deep level, everyone sort of knows that birdmen appear and do things and have things that they're trying to impart, and people will create these situations like the one at Chernobyl or the one at 9/11, the sighting. You know, just it's like people want it. They want the message to stay on, you know, in the media. I think for whatever reason, there's some deep need or understanding that we have that it needs to continue, and then maybe later it'll get sorted out better, where you know there's more facts involved with the information.
Adam, any thoughts?
Yeah, like Andy said, you know, perhaps it's the collective consciousness of humankind forming these messages, you know, in the form of smoke clouds from 9/11, or how when you look at clouds you can see things, perhaps.
And now I'm going to throw something the opposite way. I'm going to start with you, Adam,
and
throw it to Andy, because I was in touch with both of you, and you both had pretty much the same feelings on it. And that was, you know, unfortunately, we had this fiasco with the Bigfoot situation in Georgia. Adam, let me ask you about Andy, because he had pretty good instincts on it, and I didn't. Well, I mean, what they showed you was a photo that looked really horrible, but I'm like, okay, it's a photo. Did you think right from the beginning, Adam, that it was a piece of steaming dung?
Well, I went to the press conference, as you know, and I wasn't really involved in the Bigfoot scene before that, so I didn't know the players. I kind of knew about the Scardy guy, and he had kind of the reputation as a carnival huckster. But so I went to, the press conference with an open mind, and they didn't really show me anything there. There was a couple funky photos, but why not? If you're going to have this big press conference and CNN and everybody was there, why not have the body there? Why not? All they had was a couple of really funky photos, and it started, smelling real quickly. And I hadn't totally made up my mind until probably a couple hours afterwards, driving back from the press conference, that, it was a bunch of shit.
Now, Andy, I said something to you when it first broke, and you might have been tongue-in-cheek about it, but obviously, whether you were or not, you were right. Did you think this was a stinker from the get-go?
Yeah, I did. I thought it was highly, highly unlikely that they had a body. Yeah.
Well, here I am.
I'm fascinated by these things, though. I love them. I don't sit there and get all upset about it. I'm just like, well, how are they going to do this one? And we figured there'd be some sale of the body to someone, and then it would. I mean, I never thought it would actually be revealed that it was a hoax, but it,
well, I think they did try to sell the bag of goods to somebody, but it unraveled a lot quicker than the people behind this hoax expected it to.
I'm just amazed that these two individuals who get this degree of credibility because one was a police officer, the other was a correction officer, right. And that they would they would bust this move when it was doomed to fail. It's like, what were you thinking about? I mean, that's like a fifth grade type of deal. So I figured, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I'm sorry for interrupting. I think there was more people involved. I think these guys, it started out as a prank. If you look at the history of this whole thing and the YouTube videos these guys did before, this body showed up, it was obvious that these guys were just goofing off, and other players picked up on it, and it kind of took on a life of its own, and who knows exactly. It's just a whole strange thing, and people are trying to make some fast money, I think. I wouldn't blame it all on the two guys from Georgia by themselves. They got pushed along.
Well, I was interested in the timing of it. August 12th, I think, is the Aleister Crowley's favorite day of the year, and days in which he did their various rituals. And then when I saw Lauren Coleman posting the Bigfoot photos that day, that sort of triggered. I was like, wow, why is he? That's interesting. He's posting it on that day, because I'm sure Lauren was aware of that date.
Hey, is one of those rituals have to do with the ape of Thoth?
Why, I think it may. Well, gee, I would hate to say that incorrectly, but
yeah.
The ape. So there's an ape of Thoth, and not just there's a bird version of Thoth as well that I've referred to before.
A lot of people have compared the ape of Thoth or Thoth, I've heard it pronounced different ways, to Bigfoot.
Ah.
Well, let me just stop you right there for a second, because I wanted to go there. And one, I wanted to tell you, Adam, though you couldn't be with us that last show, the Untamed Grassy Knoll, Redfern, I hope wasn't suffering me, but he was a great guy. He was a gentleman. He was so much fun to talk to. And, of course...
No, that's Nick. I know him pretty well.
Okay.
He wasn't getting on any airs.
But you know that I was trying to get on in the hour before him. What's his name? Jim knows it. Skulls or Stulls.
Yeah.
And he's nowhere to be found. And, of course, Adam, you were, and I'm not saying you're wrong, you were like, you're never going to find these guys, Viz. And that may be the case. But let me get on to what I was talking to with Redfern, and we did somewhat reference the Garuda, we'll call it a legend for right now. And here's where I'm going to go with this. I had asked Nick if it were a possibility that a Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti-type individual, whatever you want to call it, even a Manitou up in the cold, cold north, if there was such a breed that could exist, especially if it were in probably the most isolation you can get on planet Earth. And he leveled his statement. But I was also wondering, and Andy, I'm throwing this to you too, if we're going to assume that such a creature is real, and I'm okay with that. I mean, I'm open, as obviously, as you guys understand. I got hoodwinked by that stuff in Georgia. But is it possible that there are species that are very much alive and well, not often in the public eye, that might be able to at least, if not prosper, continue their line if they're in a certain seclusion? Now, and I got some questions in the chat room to ask you guys after this, but what about that? And I'll throw it to you first, Andy. I don't know if you want to comment later. But what about the fact, Andy, that this can be?
Bigfoot real?
No, I'm talking about Garuda or Mothman. I mean, we're looking at a species. If there's something going on, I don't think you may remember, but I sent you something a long time ago that was a straight news story out of South America with a certain kind of, albeit smaller creature that I thought was very Mothman-like. And I don't know if you remember I sent that to you, but I did, because I'm wondering if these aren't somewhat contributory to what we know today. So, is there? Go ahead.
Well, I would reference sort of what was going on recently with my thoughts on that was I noticed that the Freemasonry has, well, there's been these 3 sightings of 3 beings, and I think that I don't think there's like a species necessarily. I think it's an archetypal process using the collective unconscious. People are seeing something. It can actually become physical for a time, but then it's not again. And people see this, and it gets reflected in the symbologies of various religions. Like in Freemasonry, you have 3 books, and then you have the one big one. And and then we had a lady in Spain who saw the 3 Mothmen with a 4th one who was like the leader or whatever. And that's kind of what we saw in 2002 in Mound. We saw 3 fuzzy, misty things, and then a 4th one flying around. And I sort of ascertained that there was something going on with that, where like the 3 were like getting to Erickson again. The 3 are there to occupy your conscious mind. Mm-hmm. And the 4th one is working at the subconscious level. That kind of, it could be that kind of thing. There's a difference between them, but it's almost like the Holy Trinity, with
right.
this kind of idea. But I've always wondered about why is there a winged thing and a non-winged thing, and I guess it's the basic symbology of Bigfoot sort of as an earth creature. Keel, has talked to people who've seen Bigfoots pulling each other out of the ground without disturbing the ground. So I think they can emanate out, and then Mothman is just more of a winged version. And I do, one of the things I find more and more little tidbits about is the basic scenario in lots of different cultures of a mound with a person on top who's got his arms spread like in a cross, and it's Jesus or it's Krishna or it's Garuda. And then I guess is the Adam Kadmon. I don't know if that's in the Bible. I think it's maybe another genre. Is it Freemasonry that started the whole Adam Kadmon is the name for Adam, and it has Mon in his name, and the old drawings of him in the Rosicrucian lore, show him on a mound with a tree, the cross. It's like a Christ figure as well.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then you had sent something out about the Son of Man in 2012, this Jesus returning kind of thing. And I've always wondered about the phrase Son of Man, and I think it's really Son of Mon in a way. There's a lot of word changes that have gone on throughout this whole story to make sort of confuse issues. And it could be that it's Son of Mon, and that the basic message of all of these is sort of that we come from the earth. Maybe there's a process by which some of these mounds have special properties that even if we were all wiped out, humanity could start again, like
right.
now manifest from the mound or something.
Mm-hmm. All right, we do have a caller, by the way, so we'll bring that person on right now. Caller, are you there?
Yeah, good evening. Andy, hello.
Hi.
I read your Mothman 2 book over the summer, and I had a synchronicity experience with it. I was reading at the same time, concurrent with that book, Neil Gaiman's American Gods. Are you familiar with that book?
Yeah, it seems like, did you write an email at some point? Oh, anyway, go ahead.
Maybe I did. What was interesting about that book was how I would have never tied the Thunderbird to the Garuda and to the Mothman before I read your book. Interestingly enough, I'm parallel reading these two books, and it actually just completely reinformed that book, which is a very dark apocalyptic book, but it has a lot of what I would consider mythology in it that are exactly what you talk about in terms of the Mothman, because it appears as though the Thunderbird, and the way it's portrayed in this book and lore, is this benevolent figure that sought out for healing and for, in this case, it's the central character is seeking it to bring back his dead wife. Wow. And I just wanted to comment that I found it very strange reading a book about synchronicity and about Mothman, and then parallel reading these two books, which was in no way planned. It was a kind of almost surreal experience, but it really informed the Gaiman book.
Well, that's interesting. The Thunderbird gets portrayed differently in the media. I found it's generally sort of, depicted as more terrifying and dangerous than when you go to a tribe and you hang out in their lodge and they have their Thunderbird totem there and you talk to, one of the medicine people. You don't hear that. You hear more like of what you're saying, that it's more benevolent and that and it's connected to healing.
Yeah.
So and the Caduceus logo looks very much like the Thunderbird.
Absolutely, and that ties into the image of the serpent, which is I've been doing research on this. The image of the serpent, and this is another subject, but the serpent itself is technically not necessarily a reptilian figure, but it goes back in ancient history as being those who were called the Watchers, oddly enough. So there's a whole thread that runs through all of this. It intersects a lot of research that I do in mythology, which is largely from the standpoint of trying to understand iconography. But I just wanted to relate that to you. That was a fascinating experience, because I totally did not plan this, and it was very interesting, and your book completely informed Neil Gaiman's book, which probably most people would consider it to be very dark literature, but it's actually very interesting mythologically.
That's a great story. The Keel talked about the serpent people a lot in the Haunted Planet book, and he's developed this whole mythology that he sort of has gathered from all the stuff he's read, really. And it's almost like it's that story that I sort of was referring to with the ancient Greeks sort of being bicameral in their minds, where they had they would hear voices. Typically in ancient Greece, they didn't have introspection. This is one of those theories out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm very familiar with that. That's I'm trying to remember the author's name, but it was The Origin of Consciousness in the Bicameral Mind, right?
Yes. And I think it's kind of referring to that process, but going further back even with the serpent people and how they sort of ruled people, and people developed an additional cosmology, which was God, which would be similar to developing the insight to no longer have to have a vision or a voice talking to you to tell you what to do next.
It was Julian Jaynes' book. That's what it was, The Origin of Consciousness.
Right.
That was the book. Yeah, that's fascinating.
And there's some ancient sculptures that are really great that show the Garuda coming. The Garuda is typically seen as standing on this female serpent, and I think it's easy to misinterpret that as a domination thing, but it's really not. I think he's emanating up from the earth. The earth is the female serpent, or earth energies, or Mary. By the way, Maya, Maya is seen as the illusion. The word we call Maya in Buddhism. Right. And according to Acharya S., who's an excellent scholar in this area, that is actually Mary, what has become Mary. So it also tells you that Virgin Mary sightings are illusory in the name itself of Mary, and that it's related to Maya. And so the Garuda comes out of this female serpent, and he more like represents the air, the yang, and the yin and yang thing, and the Garuda is the air, and the male, more of the male psyche part of it in the collective unconscious.
Pretty interesting stuff. Hey, I just wanted to share that story with you as an encouragement, because that was a pretty interesting experience of reading one book and finding out that the other book that you're reading is I can't call it anything else except synchronicity. That's just really interesting.
Right.
So I will, now that I've derailed the conversation, I'll back out of here.
Not a problem, Randy.
There's several people like that who've had synchronicity start popping off once they started reading.
Well, totally bizarre. I don't think I believed in that before this, and I'm still not sure how to completely reconcile it. But it's a strange experience.
Mm-hmm. Yes. But it's a great one.
All right. Okay, ma'am. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Randy. We are with Andrew Colvin 10 minutes before the top of the hour, which would be midnight Eastern, and he is the author of The Mothman's Photographer. There's a new edition coming out. And, Andy, anything else you want to share with the folks? We've not spoken too much about any of the other things that are going on with you.
Well, we've got some videos on YouTube now. I'm starting to get some chunks from the Mothman Photographer reality series up there, so people can kind of check it out if they haven't seen it. And right now there's some John Keel interview stuff, which I highly recommend. He's really great. And a couple of other, my sister and a guy that I was with when we sort of had this, we think it was a Bigfoot experience, sort of the invisible Bigfoot. Something was there. But we plan to get more of those on there for people. Right now there's just a few. The Silver Bridge book, the Mothman 3 is coming out. Mothman 4, there's a Mothman 4 now. We kind of shortened the third one. It was just getting to be too much. It was over 600 pages, so it's still going to be like 500 pages, but there's definitely enough to do a Mothman 4. And working on this great book with Bruce Bickford. It's sort of a fictional Mothman story, kind of, but when you're working with Bruce, you never know, because he's the master cipher for the Mothman in the Northwest. So it's basically going to be it's sort of a Bruce's story in a way. He's from a Boeing family. His father invented some famous Boeing things, and he kind of knows a heck of a lot about the area and history in general. And I think it's going to be told in the basic kind of way I've been doing the rest of the stuff, but with just sort of branching off into Bruce's world. And It's a fascinating world because he's extremely prolific in terms of writing stories, and then the stories really seem to mirror reality in strange ways that I've talked about before, in some of these interviews. And he recently had a show in LA, and that went really well, and there's another book too.
Well, I want to let folks know, by the way, that Jim has put a link on libertasmedia.org. On the left-hand side below the guest book icon, it says Mothman Video Room. So he's linked to them. Okay, so folks, if you want to do that, you just got to go to libertasmedia.org, click on that, and I guess it's whatever you put up on, what was it, YouTube?
Yeah.
Okay. So you can hit it from that website. Also, I got a question for you. Let me see. We got another caller coming on. I don't think so, but I got a question for you, which the questioner said it might be a little bit out there, but, deal with this if you can. Have you heard anything about whatever it is, legend, myth, or otherwise, about the hanging coffins in China?
Yeah, I've actually seen them.
You have? Okay, let's hear about this. Woohoo!
Well, before I get into that, can I just mention the Georgia angle on the Bigfoot body?
Absolutely, yeah, of course.
Just the fact that the name Georgia, that we had the invasion of Georgia, which was totally, I think, a U.S. op, a military op of some kind, where we were in Russia at the same time as the Olympics, and then the Georgia Bigfoot comes in right after that story hit. And then Lauren Coleman makes sure to call it the Georgia gorilla, which has a double meaning, sort of in the sense of guerrilla warfare that was sort of happening in Georgia. And I thought that I just got the sense that there was some connection. I don't know what, but it just felt like some subliminal linkage was being made between Georgia over there and Georgia over here, because I talked about this a lot, where there seems to be an operation by the military, and then there's a spate of supernatural big stories that really occupy people's minds, and I haven't quite figured out what they're doing with that, but it seems to be a pattern. But as far as the hanging coffins go, no one quite knows how they did this, but yeah, they're way up high on these cliffs, like 200 feet up. And it's basically in the Yangtze River Valley, and you go up and you go off some side tours into these valleys, and they've got they've either got them hanging or they're in these slots, the coffins, and no one quite knows how they got them in there.
Spider webs, Andy. That's how you hang a coffin.
Go rightly, you still with us. Okay, there you go.
Yeah. Well, one of the I was fascinated by the idea that as you're going along this sheer valley, it's like the Grand Canyon, sheer valley on each side, no way you could go up or down. For hundreds of, I don't know if it's hundreds of miles, but for a long way, they carved shelves into the rock, roadways. So there's no beach, there's nowhere to walk along the river. They just carved it out of the stone for miles and miles and miles. It's sort of like building the Great Wall. It's like a massive endeavor.
Yeah.
And then they would pull the boats upstream with these by slaves, basically walking along on this narrow ledge, pulling the boats from both sides, I guess.
They are an industrious people.
Yeah, it's really and they'll reenact them, sort of like we reenact our Civil War battles. They'll have guys in scanty outfits pulling boats, for whatever reason. They had some photos of those. But who knows what was going on? Maybe the water was higher back then. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. All right, so you heard of this, holy mackerel. Now, does anything happen with these coffins? I mean, the questioner also said, is there something to do with, like, flying?
Boy. Well, I don't know. I mean, the Native Americans like to bury their dead on cliffs here in the Northwest as well, and which we have around the Seattle center there, where the Space Needle is and so forth. And I live in my neighborhood where we had that supernatural water monster and the Thunderbird totems, and I think it was basically an Indian burial ground as well. It was basically the hillside that I live on, which would explain a lot of the weird stuff we've had going on here.
My last question to you would be this, and I was trying to hint at that a little bit before, and that was, we looked at something terrestrial like Bigfoot and the Yeti and such, and then we have other species, whatever you want to call it, like Garuda or Mothman, which are other than terrestrial. I mean, they fly and such. And I think, of course, everybody kind of has an affinity to that which flies, because I think we all see a certain amount of escapism in it, and I think we're probably okay with that and like that and want that to be. And this is something I said to Nick Redfern, too. You know, we really want Bigfoot to exist. Here in Florida, we really want the Panthers to exist, although they're obviously, you know, very corporeal, and there's a record to them without a doubt. But likely it's over with. With regard to the Mothman as an extension of the Garuda legend, is there something, do you think, in the human psyche, and this is not only in the United States, but global, that wants that to happen, that wants to see that? And I'm not saying that it's not there, but do you feel that most peoples around the world, I wouldn't say would champion that, but they want that to be? Have you felt that at all, Andy?
Yeah. There's the Messiah legends in various cultures, and various our own culture of that. It's just, you know, so far back, and so tends to be edited out. Things tend to be edited out in favor of monopoly knowledge, I guess you could call it. Monopoly.
All right. And a follow-up question, then we'll have to let it go at that. And this makes this follow-up question or statement makes me think back to the whole tale of Icarus, and whether that in fact was a legend or not. And that is, have you ever done any research that have gone back to a time where perhaps humans, whatever kind of humans, had the ability to fly? I'll take that as a no.
It's so hard to say. We certainly have. I mean, once you've flown, if you've like flown in a paraglider or something, it's certainly not something that you don't forget, and it sort of transforms your whole cellular being, I think, because I've done that, and I just remember how it felt like I had entered into a waking dream the minute I was flying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the high that people get into, and why they like to do it repeatedly. And
well, there's one, of course. I mean, we humans would want to do something different and escape, you know, whatever chains or bodies, you know, have cast us into. But I wonder too. You might go back to when I had Jim Ackerman on, and he was saying, don't think myths are necessarily false or just, you know, made up stories. They may be the way that past nations were able to report what was going on at the time. And so that's why, you know, with the question I got in the chat room, I'm wondering also, it could be an extension of our wanting to be airborne by ourselves, or it could also be something left over, a remnant, if you would, that there was a time when perhaps some breed could do that.
Well, yeah, I think if you're looking at the world holographically, you know, quantum physically, it's certainly, there's certainly connections happening, and that's why I sort of mentioned the cellular memory thing. Once you've flown, it sort of gets in there, and maybe it passes on to your children in some form, and that drive to fly sort of keeps us going to invent new things. Back when we didn't fly, you know, the drive to figure it out is a great way to keep people from staying in various dark ages that we seem to drop into here and there.
And interestingly, and we'll go on with this perhaps some other time, and I want folks to know that Andrew and I will continue with the timeline we've done, like we said, for years. That'll be found on the website when we do our next shows. So we didn't want to do it necessarily now. But, and of course, this may be opening a whole other can of worms or birds, whatever it should be. But I'm just wondering, too, you know, we were going back and forth with some people who have done exegeses on L. Frank Baum's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. And a guy came on, Rob Schmidt from Culver City, California, came on and said, you know, remember that in the book, the flying monkeys, which were very ominous looking in the movie, were actually good guys in the book, and that's all been forgotten. Now, having said that, what? Did you know that?
I didn't really know that.
Yeah, they are. They're good guys that were assisting, but they turned it, for the purpose of the movie, into what I would call, obviously very scary creatures, enough to make me not really want to watch that movie for a long time when I was young. But my point finally is this. It does seem that in human lore, that those that fly are not necessarily, and this is where I'm going with this, seen as ominous or hurtful to human beings, but something quite different as far as escapism, help, or hope. And so I'll leave that with that last question for you. Do you see that the whole idea behind the Garuda legend or whatever is based on something good and not bad? Much
absolutely.
like...
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's perhaps even a connection between the word good and the word Garuda, and the word God and the word Garuda. They may stem from the same source word. I think the Masonic G that we see, the symbol for the Masons, may perhaps be short for Garuda or God. And based on some of the other symbologies, I definitely think that it's Freemasonry, Christianity, Buddhism are all based on this Birdman.
Yeah, and again, much like you said when we first started doing these shows, that it was misunderstood that the Mothman was not malevolent but benevolent. And again, we take it to what we did just recently with Rob Schmidt saying, take a look at the original book, because those flying monkeys were good guys, and in fact were, but again, misunderstood. So there's a certain line in there, and it stays with us throughout generations and throughout the centuries. Folks, we've been talking with Andrew Colvin. The website is andycolvin.com. He will be with us very shortly on the website with what we've been doing continually through the years. And Andy, again, thanks for coming on. Good talking to you, and I look forward to going into our next installments.